Okay, in the last section, we're talking about mounting challenges facing the Chinese economy. So the question is, if China continues to grow, what are the implications for the world? Well, in order to address the question, we first have to understand one thing. That is, what is the Chinese worldview? How do the Chinese, or rather, how do most of the Chinese and leaders perceive the world and China itself? Before we understand this question, we cannot address the issue of implications of China for the rest of the world. So in this section, we talk about China's worldview. Well, the first interesting thing to notice about Chinese worldview is that Chinese leaders and Chinese elites, and also many people, always have economic development in their mind, or rather business in the mind. So I call this economy first. In this picture, you all recognize the Chinese man standing there, right? That's Chinese incumbent premier, Li Keqiang. Where is he? He's not in China, he's in Kenya. What is he doing in Kenya? Of course, a state visit. As a Chinese tradition, when Chinese leaders go out, they always sign business deals. So in this case, a Chinese businessman is signing a big deal, or big deals with Kenyan counterparts. So economy is first. That's the Chinese worldview, number one. That is, everything being equal, economic development is number one job. Not only for China, but also for the rest of the world. And oftentimes, Chinese leaders and the Chinese business people are often criticized by Western partners, saying, oh, you are not paying attention to human rights. You're not paying attention to political freedom. You are only doing business. For good or for bad, this is, in my view, the first ingredient of the so-called China's worldview. The second important feature of the China's worldview is what I call historical conservatism. What is historical conservatism? Let me show you maps to illustrate this. This is the map of China 200 years ago in the Qing dynasty. The big map, including the red part. This is the territory of Qing dynasty. And without the red part is today's China. Big difference, right? What happened to the red part? The red part now belongs to Russia. Don't worry, my Russian friends, I'm not claiming that China should claim back this red territory. Neither are the Chinese leaders. I would say very few people in China are claiming back this land. Why is that? This was because Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai already made a decision 50 years ago that this land should be left. This part of land should be left to the Soviet big brothers. So that is history by today's standard. And this history, that is Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai decided not to go after the Russians for this land, is a history that today's leaders are trying to preserve. I call this historical conservatism. Compare that map with this map. This is the map of China with a tiny, tiny, tiny red spot. What is red spot? That red spot are 5 rocks. In China, we call Diaoyu Islands. In Japan, they call Senkaku Islands. They are tiny islands. But why are the Chinese people and also leaders are so keen about these islands? Because Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong said that these islands belong to China, but they did not want to settle the issue. History will settle the issue later on. So today's leaders and the people are trying to preserve the immediate history left by Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. So this shows us history occupies a more important role in Chinese politics and the Chinese view of the world than many parts of the world. So I urge you to try to read and understand Chinese history before you can understand Chinese contemporary politics and the economy and society. That's the second ingredient of Chinese worldview. The third feature of China's worldview is summarized as home sweet home. In China, we have an expression that they are golden houses, they are silver houses, but the best houses are my dog house in my family. the doghouse in our family is more important than silver or golden houses outside. That is, home is very important. This is a picture that many of you in this audience must be very familiar with, that you enter every day. That is the building of Tsinghua School of Economics and Management, right? These are our home. Notice a small detail. On top of this gate, there's a line saying 顺德 building. Who is 顺德? In Chinese, of course. Who is 顺德? This gentleman is called Wu Shunde, who donated the money to the School of Economics and Management, and therefore the building is after him. He was a famous businessman, philanthropist. He made his money, and also his parents made money in Southeast Asia. But, interestingly, he was born in Guangdong. Why was that? His parents already made a big fortune outside China. Already were billionaires by today's standard in Southeast Asia. But the parents would still took a lot of trouble. At that time, no airplanes, taking boats, risking life to come back to Guangdong to deliver this baby, who later on became a gentleman, who gave us money to build this building. That's the Chinese worldview. That is, home is sweet home. This gentleman later on went abroad again to Southeast Asia, either Indonesia or Malaysia. I don't know the detail, I forgot the details, and made fortune. And then, together with several other gentlemen of a similar background, they also gave money to a university in Zhongshan, called Zhongshan University in Guangdong. It's called Lingnan College. So there's a tradition for Chinese businessmen to go abroad, but the purpose of go abroad is to come back, to be prosperous. In China, we have an expression that is return home with money and good, fancy clothing to show off in front of our families. That's a Chinese tradition. Here, to keep up the Chinese tradition, you can see this picture. What are they? These are young people. Are they protesting against the government? No. Are they engaging in some massive events like in Thailand? Protesting in the street? No. They are in the railroad of the city of Guangzhou. Doing what? Trying to queue to get in the railroad to go back home. Because in Guangdong, there are a lot of migrant workers coming from different provinces, because Guangdong is the capital of export, of processing trade. So every year, as an annual habit, they would form a big crowd in the railroad station going abroad. Some of them who couldn't come to here would ride their motorcycle. There are lines of motorcycles crowded in the Chinese roads going back home. Why that? Because they want to go home. What was the implication of this home sweet home tradition? That means that Chinese investors, business people, are indeed, yes, they are developing their business in Africa, in Latin America, but they are not trying to settle there. In contrast, let me show you a picture of a gentleman. Who is he? Many of you don't recognize him. I don't blame you. I wouldn't, other than for the reason that I was preparing for this course. This is a picture of John Cecil Rhodes. He was the Warren Buffett of his time. Where did he make money? In South Africa. What business? Of course, not computer. He made business in diamonds. The company called De Beers was established by the company which still existing today called De Beers was established by him. He was able to monopolize the business of diamonds in South Africa. In fact, at that time, the part of South Africa was called Rhodesia, named after him, Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes today is more famous for another thing, not for the Beers. The Beers is controlled by another company called Anglo-America. Rhodes is famous because his fellowship, about 110 years ago, he donated all his money to the University of Oxford in England to establish a fellowship to attract the best and brightest students from the US, from Australia, the former colonies of the UK, to come back to study at Oxford. He has one requirement, that these people have to be good athletes. His idea was to train these people to become leaders of America and Australia, and then to lead a revolt against their own governments to return to the UK. His dream, of course, was not realized, but his fellowship became very famous. The Rhodes Fellowship is almost like a Nobel Prize, the highest honor a young graduate can get in the US, in Canada, and in Australia. And in China today, of course, we are setting up a Schwarzman Scholars Program, emulating the success of the Rhodes Program. Of course, we're not trying to educate people in the US and in other countries to revolt against their own governments. We are trying to spread the understanding among young people of China, and also vice versa China of other countries. Rhodes, quintessential British gentleman. His idea, and really he succeeded, was to establish a colony in a continent far away from home. So how would you compare Rhodes with Mr. Wu Shunde? Totally different story. So therefore I claim that China's worldview is not to colonize Africa, not to colonize Latin America, rather to do business in these countries and to do economic development in these countries, and together both China and these countries can develop. That's the Chinese worldview. Number 3. Yet there's another important idea in the China's worldview. That is China exceptionalism. I borrow the word American exceptionalism. America tend to claim that they're exceptional, they're different from continental Europe, when America was emerging. But China, I would argue, is sincerely believing and trying to argue for China exceptionalism. Here's a picture, of course, oil painting. It's not like a photo, it's oil painting of an important occasion about 90 plus years ago. This is oil painting of an important event of 90 plus years ago. 20 young Chinese people, together with 2 foreigners, one Russian, one German, gathered in a building in Shanghai, in the French quarters of Shanghai, doing what? Establishing a party. Not the party university students gathered together, a political party. A party called the Communist Party. Mao Zedong is a tall figure in the oil painting. Of course, it's artistic recreation of the view with artistic imagination. Nobody knew exact details because so many years have passed, and there are also lots of controversies about details of this gathering. Anyway, the Communist Party was established with help of Russians and the Germans and also other European communists. However, tell important fact. This picture. In this picture, we have a German gentleman. His name is Otto Braun, very German name, right? Otto, O-T-T-O. What was he? This guy was famous, extremely famous in China, for good reason. He almost killed the whole Communist Party, being the most important military advisor to the Communist Party. This guy was responsible for the Long March of the Communist Party, because he was advising the Chinese Communist Party in fighting against the Nationalist Party. The problem is, he gave wrong advice. He was using German tactics in fighting Chinese Civil War. Disaster. Therefore, during the Long March, Mao Zedong and his colleagues couldn't bear him. They gathered together, they revolted against him, saying that please stay aside, we take over. You are right politically, but militarily, let's take over. That's the origin of Mao Zedong's success. And this gentleman, Otto Braun, in Chinese we call Li De, was actually properly blamed for the big military failure. And since then, the Chinese Communist Party began to adopt Mao's idea to fight guerrilla war, and the military began to be successful. And this story is even influenced today, because ever since then, the Chinese people and political party began to develop suspicion of foreign influence. Foreign influence from Russia, from Germany, as well as from today's US and other Western countries. So therefore, Chinese leaders would always go around saying that China is China. China is special. Don't always meddle in our business. We have Chinese wisdom solving Chinese problems. China is exceptional. Similar to what Americans tend to claim, that America is exceptional, Europeans don't meddle in our own business. This is also an important part of China's worldview. So we have covered 4 important ideas behind China's worldview. With this, we can further move on and discuss the implications of China's likely and continued growth for the rest of the world.